Hey, this video is going to show you how to accept payments in a Node app using Stripe, plus how to set up their webhooks. I'll be using SvelteKit to make this simple example, but the concepts can be easily applied to the framework you're used to working with, like Express or Next. To start off, I have a simple app ready to go that currently has a home page that looks like this. We have a link to buy something, and this will just take someone to a payment page. On this page, we'll load up the Stripe.js payment form. But to get Stripe on our app, we need to install some NPM modules. So first run npm install Stripe, which will install the server-side code. And also npm install @stripe/stripe-js, which is the client-side code. This allows us to import the Stripe code as an ES module instead of having to add a script tag somewhere. Now on our payment page, we're going to start by defining a Stripe variable on top. I'm using TypeScript, so I'll match the types to what Stripe will use. Then we need to run some code when the page first loads, and in SvelteKit, you do that like this. If you're using another framework, just use that framework's onLoad function. To initialize the Stripe object, we await a load Stripe function, which will import from Stripe-js. This function wants our public or publishable Stripe key, so let's see how to get that. You'll of course need to have or create a Stripe account. But once you are in, you can create a sandbox there. Here I have a sandbox already created, and we can get our API key right from the main screen. If you're on a live Stripe account, you can just search for API keys in the search bar on top. Up at the top here in the settings, I did go in and change some of the default payment methods so that only card is available, because by default there's a bunch of other weird ones that show up and come up first on the form, like Amazon Pay and things like that. Either way, we'll take that and paste it into the function. We should also check to make sure this function ran successfully. It'll be null if not. Now we need to create an element object. This just configures some options for our form later and will hold the form details eventually. Because of that, we need to declare it outside of our amount or onload function so we can use it elsewhere. And in this function, we need to pass some options like the mode, which will be a payment, the amount, and for this one, let's create a variable on top as well to hold this, as we'll need to pass it later when we get to the intent. Then at the end, the currency code. Now we need to call a create function on this element, which generates a payment element. This is a pre-made UI form from Stripe for the payment. After that, we mount this to an HTML element by ID. And we don't have that yet, so below we'll create a new div to contain the Stripe payment element and make sure to give it the same ID as above. And then a button for requesting an intent. When the user submits this form, they are really creating a payment intent with Stripe. Then Stripe will return a code for the intent back, and then we'll actually run some code to confirm the payment, and we'll get all that next. But right now, if we save, we do have a payment form on our page. The next step is getting the intent. And to make this tutorial as universal as possible, I'm going to have the intent code in an API endpoint that we're going to host ourselves. So we'll make a function called getIntent. It'll be async, as we're going to do the API call. Before we try the intent, Stripe wants us to submit the elements and check for any errors. If there are any, we would show them to the user somehow. And Stripe errors have a message property that contains the error text. Then below that, a standard fetch call to an API on our site that we haven't created yet. And the options for the fetch, we'll set the method to post, and we'll set the body to be a JSON string that contains the amount and a unique identifier for the customer. We're going to be setting the ID for the customer to Stripe because later we can use their webhooks to check for failed payments, and we'd need that information. Next, there's a line to get the JSON response and turn it into an object. Then we'll create a new variable to hold a client secret that will be in this result. Now we need to go down to our submit button and set the onClick to be this function, and this is how you do that in SvelteKit. Next, we'll create that API folder in our app. So I'll create an API folder, and then a Stripe folder, and an intent folder, and then in there, the JavaScript file for my endpoint. In SvelteKit, a post API endpoint looks like this. If you're using a different framework, just use that framework's API endpoint code and fill it in with what I'm going to fill it in with. So first thing we need to do is get the data we sent through the body and convert it from JSON to an object. And this line of code is how that's done in SvelteKit. Then we create our Stripe object again, but we need the server-side version, not the Stripe.js version. So that is imported from Stripe and not Stripe.js. This constructor wants our secret key this time. Then Stripe wants us to create the intent. In the create function, we'll send the amount in the currency code. We have access to the amount in that data object. We just need to convert it to a number first. And then we'll also send a metadata object, which can be anything we want. So just for simplicity, we'll send the customer ID in here, and we'll use this later in a webhook to do something if the payment failed. Now we just send back the intent client secret as a JSON string. Again, just use your framework's method for doing this. This is how it would be done in Express, for example. Now back on the payment form, we already have the code that grabs the secret. After that, we call a Stripe function that confirms the payment. This function wants our elements, which would be what the user filled in out in the form. It wants the client secret and the return URL to send people after they're done. And this could return an error if something is wrong, like if they didn't fill anything out. So we can destructure it from the response. And if there is an error, display it somehow. Now we can try it out. I'll enter some fake info, and one of the test cards in the sandbox mode is just 4242 repeated. And there we go. We get sent to a payment confirmation page. Now this doesn't always mean the payment was successful. Stripe provides something called webhooks, and they'll notify you when a payment was declined or failed for some reason. So let's set that up. If we go to our Stripe sandbox dashboard and search for webhook, we can see a page where we can create a new destination. Stripe will send the notifications to somewhere on your site. But since we're on localhost right now, we'll choose the test in local environment option instead. In order for that to work, we'll download the Stripe CLI. I'm using Windows, so I'll download their zip for that. Once it's unzipped, we'll put it somewhere, and I'll just create a Stripe CLI folder under the C drive for now. Then we need to go to the Windows environmental variables and add that folder to the paths variable. You can just use the search in Windows to pull this up. We should be able to pull up a terminal in Windows and type Stripe login now, and we'll be asked to log in. After we're logged in, we run a command to listen to events and forward it to an endpoint on our app. I'm going to say this will be under a /webhook folder. Let's leave this terminal running for now, and let's create that webhook folder. This will also be looking for a post request. So I'm going to steal the same JavaScript file for our intent API. And in there we can clear the code in the middle minus the Stripe object line. We still want that. If we go back to our Stripe endpoint page, we need another secret key for the webhook. So let's move that over to our code. Then we need to grab a header from the request called stripe-signature. And this is how you get request headers in SvelteKit. Next, we create an event variable and set it to be our Stripe object plus webhook.construct event. And in there, send the body of the request, the signature header, and the secret. Now we can use a switch statement to check for the events we got and do something with them. So let's check for a charge.succeeded event and just console log what we have access to it there. Outside of the switch statement, at the end, we'll return a successful status as the Stripe webhook is looking for status 200. Now let's make another payment with the CLI terminal running and see what happens. If we look in the terminal now, we received 4 different webhooks: payment intent created, succeeded, and charge succeeded and updated. And in our console, where we logged what the webhook sent us, we have access to our customer ID down here in the metadata property. Now let's try a bad card. Stripe does have test numbers to simulate a bad card, so let's grab one of those. And when we fill it out, we do get an error on our page, and in the webhook, a charge.failed event. Also, let's look for that in our switch statement in the code. In here, you'd probably want to do some logic depending on how you're logging, what they bought, and who they are. And there's a few different ways this can be done. You could save the customer and their order after they press the button, but before you make the intent, because at that point you likely have other data being sent in besides the card info, like the new user's info or their cart or whatever. But if you do that, you definitely need to use the webhook to then cancel the order or delete the user if the intent and payment fails after. Or you can send all the order and customer info in the metadata of the intent, and then use the hooks to look for successful payments. And then the webhook code create the customer, create the order, email them, or whatever you need to do. No matter what you're doing, you would for sure want to save the ID of the charge in the webhook. It starts with a ch underscore. You'd need this ID later if you ever needed to refund the charge programmatically later. Plus, it's just good to save as reference so you can compare it to the charges on your Stripe account if needed. And I think that's about it for this video. Don't forget, when you're ready to go live, replace your sandbox keys with live keys. And if you have any questions about this or how I set it up, please let me know, and thanks for watching.